Want to know why Mopar muscle cars were so fast? Stay tuned for the story of the Ramchargers. Through the years, drag racing has produced dozens of big stars. Racers like Big Daddy Don Garlitz, Don the Snake Prudhomme, Soxon Martin. But during the 60s, one name was responsible for more innovation, more technology, and more fan enthusiasm than any other. The name belonged to a group of guys who all share the same passion, making Mopars go faster than anyone else on the racetrack. They called themselves the Ramchargers. The Ramchargers were drag racing's first dream team. All of them were young men in their 20s, and practically all of them were Chrysler engineers. From 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, they helped Chrysler Corporation create some of the muscle car era's most powerful hardware. But on weekends, they took this hardware to the track and blew everyone away. Starting in 1958 and racing through 1967, the original Ramchargers did more than anyone else to create Chrysler Corporation's high-performance image. They also share their speed secrets with all of Chrysler's other racing teams. And in their spare time, the guys in those candy-striped cars became the most successful and popular drag racing team the young sport had ever seen. What makes their success all the more amazing is the fact that this group did most of this on their own. Despite what many people thought, the Ramchargers wasn't a high-dollar Chrysler-sponsored racing team. They started out as a car club.
We had a group of 10 or 12 guys that were really devoted. Then we had, other members of the Ramchargers that they came and went.
Dan Mancini was an engine builder, one of the original group who formed the Ramchargers.
Most of them were engineers. And we got together a couple times a month at a meeting after work. Each of the individuals had their own project that they wanted to do. If they didn't have their own projects, they would help one of the other fellows that did have a project. And we'd help one another.
Jim Thornton shared the driving with other members like Herm Moser, Mike Buckle, and others. He eventually became the club president. When he joined up, the Ramchargers were already becoming famous.
I had read about the Ramchargers in hot rod magazines before I went to work at Chrysler. I started in February of '60. And the second assignment I had, I went to a group in the engine lab, and there were 2 people in the engine lab that were Ramchargers. So I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. They invited me to go to one of the meetings and then later to join the club.
Gary Congdon was a fuel system specialist from Holly Carburetors who was on loan to Chrysler Corporation. A little engineering department networking brought him into the club.
Danny sort of invited me. I think he needed somebody to clean up the floors and wax the cars, and he says, you ought to come down and see what this is all about.
Chrysler was a very unique organization at that time. While it was a big company, you got to know everybody. Everybody was very approachable in engineering, and everybody was helpful, and it was a great place for a young engineer to start out.
Tom Coddington was a fuel system expert, and he soon became one of the club's engine builders. For him and the other Ramchargers, getting into drag racing wasn't natural.
Every community of any size had a drag strip that was either full-time or an airport runway that they used once a month. That's the way it was when I grew up. And anybody could get involved as long as they had a driver's license and the car passed tech.
Within months of their first meeting, the Ramchargers had built their first club car, a funny-looking '49 Plymouth.
We built a car called the High and Mighty. It was quite an exotic car. It done some unusual things on the track because of the suspension, but it was a very successful car for a low-budget car. I mean low budget, probably $200 or $300, and all the parts we could scrounge up.
Stay with us. We'll go to the track with the Ramchargers when the American Muscle Car continues. Drag racing in the early 60s was a real come-as-you-are motorsport. The racers who went the fastest were the people that weren't afraid to try anything. Obviously, the Ramchargers were those kinds of racers. Racing a 49 Plymouth Coupe was weird enough, but from its up-in-the-sky suspension to its outlandish intake manifold, actually the first tunnel ram, to its wild-looking exhaust headers, High and Mighty was a collection of new ideas that only a bunch of engineers like the Ramchargers could dream up.
The plan was to get the center of gravity real high and get weight transfer to the rear tires to get traction. And it was known at Chrysler at that time that a tune length intake manifold system would develop more power than the standard put the carburetors down on a manifold. And the first time they ran at an NHRA event, the Ramchargers High and Mighty set the speed record for that class and held it for 3 years.
High and Mighty did more than just set speed records. It opened some doors inside Chrysler Corporation for the Ramchargers. In 1961, they finally got some factory help. The Ramchargers' first factory race car was this 61 Dodge. It was different, but when they gave it the Ramcharger treatment, their competition was in for a real surprise.
Came to stock eliminator, and we had turned some real good times and good ETs, and Don Nicholson in a Chevy won the race. And there was a lull in the racing, and the announcer just kind of passing time, would it be interesting to see that Mopar run Nicholson? And the crowd started chanting for a race. And they asked Nicholson, you hear that? They want you to race that Mopar. And he made a fatal mistake. He said, sure. And the picture that was shown in all the magazines was the Ramchargers car out about like that on Nicholson, and the Ramchargers going through the traps. Within a month after all those magazines came out, all of a sudden Chrysler decided, hey, we ought to get in drag racing.
As 1962 rolled around, Dodge was hard at work presenting a racy image to America's car buyers. And now, thanks to the Ramchargers, they had the hardware to back it up. Finally, here was a Mopar that could go toe-to-toe with the 409 Chevys and the Super Duty Pontiacs. The 62 Max Wedge cars were all business. 3,200 pounds of pure muscle with a 413 cubic inch engine that would go from 0 to hang on in a heartbeat. With 13.5 to 1 compression, dual Carter 4 barrels on an aluminum cross ram intake manifold, and low restriction exhaust manifolds, this thing was made to go racing. And in a long overdue tribute to their home team, and maybe an attempt to share some of the glory, Dodge named their bad boy power plant the Ramcharger engine. But even though this team was mostly responsible for Chrysler's new racy attitude, they were still going racing on their own time and on their own dime.
Any of the work that we done on the Ramchargers cars was done after work hours. None of the work was done during work hours. This is early on. I mean, we left our job and we went to the garage and worked on various cars. And the factory really looked down at the drag racing. They put it in the same category as motorcycles.
Well, even if the suits at Chrysler weren't impressed, the Ramchargers were winning. Stay with us as the engineers race into their most successful season yet on the American Muscle Car. The 1963 drag racing season came blasting in on a wave of excitement. Thanks to all the side-by-side racing in 1962, the stock classes were now the fan favorites. Looking at the staging lanes, it was plain to see that Mopar was now in total control of stock and superstock. But now, those hot Max Wedge parts were available to everyone. For 1963, Dodge turned it up a few more clicks. The Max Wedge cars were still lighter than the competition, but the hardware was even more brawny, with sure grip rear ends, heavy-duty torque flight transmissions, and more cubic inches under the hood. This year, Dodge's Ramcharger engine was punched out to 426 cubic inches, with larger intake and exhaust ports and a solid lifter cam. Even Plymouth, who hadn't seen any future in drag racing just 2 years earlier, was down with the program now, putting their version of the Max Wedge engine into everything from the Lowbuck Savoy to the upscale Sport Fury. Plymouth even called their Max Wedge engines the Superstock series. They were available in single 4-barrel 385 horse or a dual 4-barrel 415 horse version with 11-to-1 compression, or the 13.5-to-1 compression racing version, which cranked out 425 horsepower. Racers could even get aluminum hoods, fenders, front bumpers, and doors, taking 150 pounds off the front end of those already slim cars. These lightweight Max Wedge Mopars were the closest things to over-the-counter race cars anyone had ever seen.
You could drive the car to the drag strip. We had caps that you took off of the exhaust system, which added another 90 horsepower. And you could go race. And you could race any Ford or Chevy or Pontiac and usually beat them. And if you're running the automatic transmission, you surely beat them because the traction was so poor at that time. So it was a car ready to race.
From day one, the 63 Max Wedge cars rolled up the competition at every drag strip in the country. And now, thanks to the availability of all this good stuff, there were dozens of Dodge and Plymouth race teams armed with the parts the Ramchargers helped develop, and everyone was gunning for those red and white cars. As the competition heated up, the team members now started to feel the effects of working full-time jobs and running what was becoming a full-time racing operation. Sometimes there just weren't enough hours in a day.
I really didn't expect the long hours that we put in a lot of times. And I can fondly remember going to the Summer Nationals with, I think, the 63 car that we towed down there. And we're breaking the engine going down to Indianapolis. So I had to sit in the car, no windows, of course. We left about midnight. It's cold out, and we're trying to keep the noise down, but yet keep the RPM up to around 2,000 to get it broken in as much as we could.
The hard work, the long hours, and the engineering expertise paid off nicely for the Ramchargers in '63. The team won top stock eliminator at both the Winter Nationals and the U.S. Nationals this year, finishing 1-2 at Indy and setting a new class record. Not bad for a bunch of full-time engineers and part-time racers. Sailing into 1964, the Ramchargers could be sure of two things. They'd be going faster, and there would be even tougher competition. We'll go there when the American muscle car returns. When 1964 began, the Max Wedge 426 still owned drag racing stock classes. But this was about to change. Down south, there was another kind of racing going on, and Chrysler had a magic bullet ready to go into these circle track cars. It was a new version of an old friend from the 50s, the Hemi engine. And as you might expect, the Ramchargers played a big part in developing this engine.
It was pretty secretive that the design of the Hemi started. Hoover was involved with it. At the time, I had moved into the race group working for Tom, and I didn't even know about it for quite a while.
For 1964, Tom Hoover had redesigned the Hemi engine until it was a totally new creation. About the only thing it shared with the early Hemi was the shape of its combustion chamber. For the past few years, the NASCAR Fords had more power than the Dodges and Plymouths. The new Hemi was going to shake things up.
Well, the first time the Hemi ran as a NASCAR engine, number one run that it made more horsepower than the Wedge engine had ever run. And Ford was absolutely went berserk because the cars were going fast, a lot faster than the Fords were. And then, of course, Petty won the race.
The NASCAR Hemi had one set of problems getting dialed in, but the drag racers were going to have to deal with a different set of issues. As usual, the Ramchargers were totally involved.
Well, Gary and I both worked on the fuel system a bit. We had some initial carburetor problems that in the drag racing version. Really, the emphasis was on the NASCAR version, and incidentally, the drag racing version was brought along, but two carburetor version, when we went to drag race, it took some work.
Being a cross ram, it had a lot of cylinder to cylinder variation that we had to overcome. And also at the time, the carburetors were before double pumpers, and they were vacuum operated secondaries. So that took some development time to get that to work right.
Once these problems were sorted out, the Hemi immediately put more distance between the Mopars and everyone racing anything else.
We took it out for the first time, never had run it to Detroit Dragway, and it was an NHRA meet. And I think it was running in FX and set ET and speed records for the class the first time it ran with the Holley carburetors. And it ran with Holleys from then on.
Still, though, there was the old problem of no traction, and the shot of new horsepower from the Hemi only made things worse. It was time for another engineering solution, and this one would revolutionize the sport. To get better weight distribution, the team made a radical change, moving both the front and the rear wheels forward 4 inches. This shifted more weight over the car's rear wheels for better bite. The whole thing was so cleverly done, many people didn't even notice. This little wheelbase adjustment worked, so the team decided that if a little was good, then a lot would be just right.
For 65, we decided that we'd go up just a little bit more radical. So we moved the front wheels forward 10 inches and moved the rear wheels forward 15.
The altered wheelbase factory experimental car was pretty off the wall, even for a bunch of forward thinkers like the Ramchargers, and not everybody thought it was a good idea.
They brought NHRA in to show them what our next factory experimental car would be. And they came in, and there were only 2 or 3 people that were allowed to be there with them. And they went away, and just, no way.
Even though NHRA didn't like it, it worked great. And in drag racing, if something works, it catches on. Almost overnight, altered wheelbase cars started showing up everywhere, and the Ramchargers had invented a whole new class of race car.
People at the races wanted to see those funny-looking cars run, which were the Mopars. It got from the funny-looking cars to the funny cars.
With the Hemi, the new car, and more competition, running a top racing team was demanding even more time. Stay with us as things really speed up on the American muscle car. Between 1963 and 1966, drag racing's door slammer classes exploded. Superstock had evolved from basically stock cars running in the 12s at 120 miles per hour to wild exotic creations with altered wheelbases running in the 8s at over 150 miles per hour. At the head of this pack, as usual, were the Ramchargers. In addition to the AFX 65 Dodge Coronet, the team was now running a top fuel dragster. And for many of the team members, drag racing was becoming another full-time job.
Our regular weekend in the summertime was leave work Friday night. We'd run in Ohio on Friday night. From Ohio, we'd drive to the East Coast, run another match race on Saturday, and then on Sunday, we'd run another match race on Sunday against somebody else, and then drive all the way back and be at work Monday morning.
Drag racing was also becoming an expensive pastime. Despite some help from the corporation, the Ramchargers were still paying for most of this out of their own pockets. But luckily, they were able to make some of their racing pay off.
The owner of the track here in Detroit contacted us and said he was going to have Nicholson come in and he'd like us to race them. And, you know, we expected 50 or 100 bucks or something and free pit passes. And Dan kept working on him, and an hour and a half later, it was $500. And I was sitting there and I couldn't keep a straight face, just laughing. He just kept squeezing him and squeezing him. And when he figured he got to 500, he thought that, well, that's probably all he's going to pay us. That was our first match race, and we got paid for it. And we found out from that experience that, well, we could go other places and get paid for it.
By 1966, funny cars had evolved from the wild AFXers into full tube chassis, fiberglass-bodied race cars. And the speeds in both funny car and Top Fuel were approaching 200 miles per hour. It was a very different sport and a very different environment than the one they took on back in 1959. The Ramchargers had been at the top of the sport for nearly 10 years, and their list of achievements was incredible. They were the first to run a 9-second quarter mile on gasoline, the first AFXer in the 8s on nitro, and their 66 Dart was the first funny car to run in the 7s. And amazingly, they did it all without giving up their day jobs.
Within the engineering establishment, the racers were still looked on as a little bit odd, why we wanted to do this. And it probably wasn't the best thing for corporate advancement. And that's probably why we didn't stay much after racing left.
But in 1967, after having achieved practically every goal there was in drag racing, it was time to stop and take a look around.
We had moved up somewhat in the corporation, more responsible jobs, not necessarily working in the race group anymore. And it was, hey, what are we going to do? Are we going to quit work and race? And at the end of '67, we finally decided, well, it's time to get out.
After the original group had retired, a Ramchargers racing team led by Dick Skoglund, Dick Maxwell, Dan Knapp, and others continued to run Top Fuel, Funny Car, and Pro Stock for several more years. This group finally hung it up in 1975, converting the racing enterprise into a successful retail auto parts business. Many of the teams still get together today, but not to go racing. These guys have been there and done that. And today's drag racers and fans all owe them a thanks for making this sport so exciting. Thanks for watching, and please remember, don't crush them, restore them.